So, let's talk about power. It's the thing everyone wants, from the kid who wants to control the TV remote to, well, people who want to control entire countries. And throughout history, some leaders have found a cheat code, a shortcut to getting and keeping that power. It's a dark and dangerous one, but it's proven surprisingly effective, using race as a tool to maintain their grip. It's like the ultimate reality show drama, but with real-world consequences. You create an us, you create a them, and suddenly, you're the hero defending your team from a manufactured enemy. It's a playbook as old as time, but it keeps getting new players. Now this isn't a comfortable topic, it's messy, it's complicated, and it forces us to look at some of the ugliest parts of our societies. But ignoring it doesn't make it go away. In fact, that's what these leaders count on. They thrive in the silence, in the let's not get political moments. They build their empires on the fault lines they themselves create, cracking open societies and pitting neighbor against neighbor. It's a strategy that distracts from their own failings. Can't fix the economy? Blame that group over there. High unemployment? It's their fault. It's a powerful and toxic deflection. So for this video, we're going to dive right into that discomfort. We're not here to just point fingers, but to understand the mechanics of this dangerous game. How does it work? Why is it so effective? And what are the devastating costs? Let's take a look at 10 leaders who have used racial divisions to their advantage. We'll break down their tactics, the language they used, and the impact they had, or are still having on their nations. It's a tough journey, but an important one. Let's get into it. Alright, let's start with the big one, the name that has become synonymous with evil itself, Adolf Hitler. You can't talk about using race for power without talking about the man who turned it into a state-sponsored, industrial-scale nightmare. In post-World War I Germany, the country was on its knees, the economy was in shambles, national pride was shattered, and people were desperate for answers, for someone to blame. And Hitler, with his chilling charisma, stepped onto that stage and gave them a simple, terrifying answer: the Jews. He didn't just suggest it, he built an entire worldview, a twisted mythology, around it. Through his book Mein Kampf and his relentless speeches, he painted a picture of an Aryan master race whose purity was being corrupted by Jewish people. This wasn't just political rhetoric, it was a carefully constructed ideology of hate. He claimed they were responsible for Germany's economic collapse, for its military defeat, for everything that had gone wrong. It was a powerful narrative because it offered a scapegoat, a single target for all the nation's fear, anger, and humiliation. The Nazi propaganda machine led by Joseph Goebbels was a masterclass in manipulation. They used every medium available, posters, radio, films, even children's books, to dehumanize Jewish people. They were depicted as vermin, as puppeteers controlling global finance, as a threat to German blood and soil. This constant bombardment of hate normalized prejudice and stripped away the humanity of an entire group of people. It made it easier for ordinary citizens to look the other way, and eventually to participate in the horrors that followed. This racial ideology wasn't just a sideshow to his politics, his politics. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 legally codified this racism, stripping Jewish citizens of their rights, their property, and their citizenship. It defined who was German and who was not, based on bloodlines. This classification was the bureaucratic foundation for the Holocaust. By creating this internal enemy, Hitler consolidated his power, uniting a segment of the German population in a shared hatred and fear, all while systematically eliminating his political opponents and anyone who didn't fit his Aryan ideal. The result was the Holocaust, the systematic genocide of 6 million Jews and millions of others, including Romani people, Slavs, and disabled individuals. It stands as the ultimate horrifying example of where this path leads. Hitler's rise shows that when a leader uses race to divide, it's not just about winning an election or holding on to power. It's about fundamentally reshaping a society, poisoning its soul, and unleashing a capacity for cruelty that can lead to the darkest chapters in human history. It's the blueprint, the terrifying proof of concept. Now let's jump from the history books to the very recent past, and a figure who dominated global headlines, Donald Trump. His presidency was a whirlwind, and a central part of his political strategy, from the moment he came down that golden escalator, was the use of racially charged language. He didn't invent division in America, those lines were already there, but he amplified it, he weaponized it, and he used it to build one of the most fervent political bases in modern history, It was a different style, a different era, but the playbook had some familiar pages. His 2016 campaign kicked off with a now infamous statement about Mexican immigrants, calling them rapists and saying they were bringing drugs and bringing crime. This wasn't a gaffe, it was a deliberate strategy. It immediately set an US versus them tone. Us, the hardworking, law-abiding Americans, and them, the dangerous outsiders. This message resonated with a segment of the population that felt left behind by globalization and worried about demographic change. Trump gave their anxieties a name and a face, and positioned himself as the only one tough enough to build a wall and protect them. Throughout his presidency, this pattern continued. There was the Muslim ban, an executive order restricting travel from several Muslim-majority countries, which critics argued was a direct fulfillment of his campaign promise for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. There was his response to the white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, where he claimed there were very fine people on both sides. This statement was seen by many as a shocking moral equivalency, giving comfort to extremist groups and blurring the lines between hate and legitimate protest. He also frequently used terms like invasion to describe immigration at the southern border and employed racially coded dog whistles like attacking political correctness and defending heritage, which many supporters understood as a defense of a traditional white-centric vision of America. He attacked NFL players who were predominantly black for kneeling during the anthem to protest police brutality, reframing their protest as an insult to the flag and the military. This tactic successfully shifted the conversation away from racial injustice and turned it into a culture war battleground, energizing his base. For his supporters, this rhetoric wasn't racist. It was telling it like it is. They saw him as a fighter, a man unafraid to speak uncomfortable truths and push back against a liberal elite that looked down on them. He masterfully tapped into a deep well of resentment and cultural anxiety. By constantly creating these racial and cultural flashpoints, Donald Trump ensured the media cycle was always about him, and that his base remained in a constant state of mobilization, ready to defend their champion against a sea of perceived enemies. It was a powerful and deeply polarizing strategy. Let's head south to Brazil, a nation celebrated for its vibrant, multicultural identity. But beneath that surface lies a deep and complex history of racial inequality. And into this environment stepped Jair Bolsonaro, a former army captain who earned the nickname Trump of the Tropics. His political rise was fueled by a similar brand of populist right-wing rhetoric, and race played a significant and often shocking role in his strategy. He didn't just whisper dog whistles, he often shouted his controversial views from the rooftops. Bolsonaro has a long history of making inflammatory statements about race. He once said that quilombolas, residents of settlements founded by runaway slaves, do nothing and were not even fit for procreation. Such a comment in a country where more than half the population identifies as black or mixed race is staggering. But for his base, it was part of his appeal. They saw him as an authentic, anti-establishment figure, someone willing to shatter the politically correct norms they felt were holding Brazil back. His blunt, often offensive language was seen as a sign of strength, not prejudice. His policies and rhetoric also took aim at Brazil's indigenous populations. He has consistently advocated for opening up protected indigenous lands in the Amazon to commercial farming, mining, and logging. He's compared indigenous people living in protected reserves to prehistoric men and animals in a zoo, arguing that they should be assimilated into mainstream Brazilian society. This rhetoric not only dismisses their unique cultures and rights but also directly fuels the violence and land invasions committed by illegal miners and loggers, who feel emboldened by his words. This strategy plays into a deep-seated narrative within a part of Brazilian society that sees environmental protections and indigenous rights as obstacles to economic progress. By framing indigenous communities and environmental activists as enemies of development, Bolsonaro rallies support from powerful agribusiness and mining lobbies, as well as from citizens who believe that exploiting the Amazon is the key to Brazil's prosperity. He creates a clear US, the hard-working Brazilians who want progress, and a them, the lazy minorities and their liberal defenders holding the country back. Ultimately, Bolsonaro's use of race is about reinforcing traditional power structures. In a nation still grappling with the legacy of slavery and colonialism, his words and actions serve to marginalize Afro-Brazilians and indigenous peoples further. He validates old prejudices and gives them a modern political voice. By attacking affirmative action, dismissing claims of racism, and championing a vision of Brazil that sidelines its non-white citizens, he consolidates his power among a conservative base that feels its traditional status is under threat. It's a divisive but politically potent formula. Now we travel to the world's largest democracy, India, a nation of incredible diversity with a dizzying array of religions, languages, and ethnic groups. For decades, its political ideal was secularism. But under Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Bharatiya Janata Party, or BJP, India has seen a dramatic rise in Hindu nationalism, or Hindutva. This ideology seeks to define Indian culture and identity in terms of Hindu values, and it has had profound and often dangerous consequences for the country's religious and racial minorities, especially its 200 million Muslims. Modi's political journey began in the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, or RSS, a right-wing Hindu nationalist paramilitary organization. The RSS is the ideological parent of the BJP, and its core belief is that India is fundamentally a Hindu nation. This ideology inherently positions non-Hindus, particularly Muslims and Christians, as outsiders whose loyalty is suspect. While Modi often speaks of unity and development on the national stage, his political history and his party's actions tell a story of religious and ethnic polarization. A key moment in this story was the 2002 Gujarat riots, which occurred when Modi was the state's chief minister. Following a fire on a train that killed Hindu pilgrims, a wave of brutal anti-Muslim violence swept the state, leaving over 1,000 people dead, most of them Muslims. Critics accused Modi's government of not doing enough to stop the violence, and some alleged complicity. While he was cleared by Indian courts, the event has shadowed his career, cementing his image among his critics as a divisive figure and for his ardent supporters as a strong Hindu leader unafraid to protect his own. Under his premiership, this nationalist rhetoric has moved from the fringes to the center of Indian politics. We've seen the passage of the Citizenship Amendment Act, or CAA, which fast-tracks citizenship for non-Muslim refugees from neighboring countries. Critics argue that this is the first time religion has been used as a criterion for Indian citizenship, and they see it as a deliberate attempt to marginalize Muslims. This, combined with a proposed National Register of Citizens, or NRC, has stoked fears among Indian Muslims that they could be rendered stateless. This strategy works by consolidating the Hindu vote, which makes up about 80% of the population. By constantly framing issues through a lens of Hindu pride and grievance, the BJP energizes its base. They portray Muslims as a demographic threat, as descendants of historical invaders, and as a community that receives preferential treatment. This narrative distracts from pressing issues like unemployment and economic inequality, and instead focuses the national conversation on identity and religion. It's a powerful tool for mobilization, but one that is fraying India's secular fabric and creating deep, potentially irreparable divisions. Let's turn to Africa, specifically Zimbabwe, and a leader whose legacy is incredibly complex, Robert Mugabe. He began his career as a celebrated liberation hero, a revolutionary who fought against white minority rule in what was then Rhodesia, and helped bring independence to his nation. He was hailed as a champion of his people, but over his nearly 4 decades in power, that image curdled as he increasingly relied on racial division, specifically anti-white rhetoric, to cling to power as his country crumbled around him. In the early years after independence in 1980, Mugabe preached a message of racial reconciliation. He urged black and white Zimbabweans to work together to build a new nation. But as the years went on and Zimbabwe's economy began to falter due to mismanagement and corruption, Mugabe needed a scapegoat. He found a convenient one in the country's small but economically powerful white minority, particularly the white farmers who still owned a large portion of the nation's most fertile land. The turning point was the controversial land reform program, which began in earnest in 2000. Mugabe framed it as a necessary correction of colonial injustice, a reclaiming of land stolen from black Africans. While the issue of land inequality was very real and deeply felt, the implementation was chaotic and violent. War veterans and youth militias, loyal to Mugabe's ZANU-PF party, were encouraged to forcibly seize white-owned farms. This was not just an economic policy, it was a political weapon. The anti-white rhetoric became a cornerstone of his speeches. He called white farmers enemies of the state, blaming them for the country's economic woes and accusing them of collaborating with Britain and other Western powers to undermine his rule. This narrative was incredibly effective at deflecting blame. Whenever there were fuel shortages, hyperinflation, or food scarcity, Mugabe could point to the white farmers and their supposed international conspirators. It was a classic case of manufacturing an enemy to distract from his own government's failures. This strategy had devastating consequences. It shattered Zimbabwe's agricultural sector, once known as the breadbasket of Africa, leading to widespread famine and economic collapse. It also created a climate of fear and violence, not just for the white minority but for any black Zimbabwean who dared to oppose Mugabe. The opposition party, the MDC, was often branded as a puppet of the white farmers and Western interests. In the end, Mugabe's use of race was a desperate, cynical ploy to maintain his grip on power, sacrificing his country's prosperity and unity for his own political survival. Let's go back to Europe, to Hungary, and a leader who has positioned himself as the continent's staunchest defender against what he calls the Muslim invasion, Viktor Orban. Over the past decade, Orban has transformed Hungary's political landscape, building what he proudly calls an illiberal democracy. A central pillar of this project has been the relentless use of anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim rhetoric, creating a siege mentality where he is the only one who can protect Hungary's Christian identity. Orban's narrative is simple and powerful. Christian Europe is under threat. He paints a picture of a continent being overrun by Muslim migrants who refuse to assimilate and who threaten to destroy Europe's culture, traditions, and security. The 2015 migrant crisis was a gift to him politically. As hundreds of thousands of refugees, many from Syria, crossed into Europe, Orban responded by building a massive razor-wire fence on Hungary's southern border. This fence became a potent physical symbol of his entire political ideology, Hungary as a fortress, with him as its guardian. His government has spent vast sums of public money on propaganda campaigns to reinforce this message. Billboards across the country have carried messages like "Don't let Brussels decide for us," and have depicted migrants as a dangerous, faceless horde. He constantly rails against the European Union, accusing its leaders of trying to force Hungary to accept migrants against its will. This creates a two-front war in his rhetoric, one against the external threat of migrants and another against the internal threat of globalist elites in Brussels. Another key target in Orban's narrative is the Hungarian-American billionaire George Soros. Orban's government has run extensive campaigns portraying Soros, who is Jewish, as a shadowy puppet master secretly orchestrating the flow of migrants into Europe to undermine its Christian nations. Critics have widely condemned this campaign as using anti-Semitic tropes, echoing the conspiratorial propaganda of the 1930s. By creating this powerful, personalized villain, Orban gives a face to the globalist forces he claims are trying to destroy Hungary. This strategy has been remarkably successful for Orban politically. It has allowed him to consolidate power, win multiple elections with supermajorities, and rewrite the country's constitution. By keeping the nation in a constant state of perceived crisis, he can justify cracking down on independent media, the judiciary, and NGOs, all under the guise of protecting national security. He has effectively used the fear of a racial and religious other to unite his base and dismantle the checks and balances of a liberal democracy. Now let's look at one of the most complex and honestly contentious political arenas in the world, Israel. And at its center for much of the last 3 decades has been Benjamin Netanyahu. A master political survivor, Netanyahu has frequently been accused of using fear-based messaging and stoking divisions, particularly between Jewish and Arab citizens of Israel, to rally his right-wing base and maintain his hold on power. In a country living with constant security threats, the politics of fear is, well, a really potent tool. One of the most infamous examples came on Election Day in 2015. Facing a tough race, Netanyahu's Likud party sent out a message warning supporters that the right-wing government is in danger. Arab voters are heading to the polling stations in droves. The implication was clear. The participation of Arab citizens in the democratic process was a threat to the nation. It was a naked attempt to use racial and ethnic identity to scare his base into voting, and it was widely condemned both within Israel and internationally. And this was not an isolated incident. Netanyahu has often framed Israel's Arab minority, which makes up about 1/5 of the population, as a fifth column, questioning their loyalty and associating them with Israel's external enemies. This rhetoric serves to other a significant portion of the country's own citizenry, creating a sense of internal threat that only a strong, right-wing leader like himself can manage. It deepens the rifts within Israeli society and makes cooperation and coexistence, well, a lot more difficult. This strategy extends to his foreign policy messaging as well, particularly regarding Palestinians and the wider Arab world. He has built his political brand on being Mr. Security, the only leader tough enough to stand up to Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas. While security is a genuine and paramount concern for Israelis, critics argue that Netanyahu often exaggerates threats and uses fear of the Arab other to avoid making difficult concessions for peace and to justify controversial policies, like the expansion of settlements in the West Bank. In 2018, his government passed the controversial nation-state law, which declared that only Jewish people have the right of self-determination in the country and downgraded Arabic from an official language. Supporters called it a necessary affirmation of Israel's Jewish character, but critics, including many Arab and Druze citizens who serve in the Israeli military, saw it as a law that legally enshrined them as second-class citizens. For Netanyahu, the law was a victory that appealed directly to his nationalist base, solidifying his credentials as the defender of Israel's Jewish identity, even at the cost of alienating its minorities. For our next example, we must return to the 1990s and the brutal collapse of Yugoslavia. In the heart of that conflict was Slobodan Milosevic, the president of Serbia. He wasn't a fire-breathing ideologue in the mold of Hitler, but a cold, calculating opportunist. He saw the rising tide of nationalism as the Soviet Union crumbled, and he rode that wave to power, expertly manipulating Serbian national identity and stoking ancient ethnic hatreds to achieve his political goals with, catastrophic consequences. Yugoslavia was a multi-ethnic federation, a delicate balance of Serbs, Croats, Bosniaks, Albanians, and others. As communism waned, old grievances began to resurface. Milosevic, then a Communist Party official, saw his opportunity. In a famous 1987 speech in Kosovo, a region with a Serbian minority and an Albanian majority, he told a crowd of angry Serbs, "No one should dare to beat you." This moment is seen as the launch of his nationalist campaign. He positioned himself as the sole protector of the Serbian people, not just in Serbia, but across all of Yugoslavia. He and his state-controlled media began a relentless propaganda campaign. They portrayed Serbs as historical victims, constantly under threat from their neighbors, especially the Croats, who were depicted using imagery from the fascist Ustazi regime of World War II, and the Bosniaks, Bosnian Muslims, who were labeled as Islamic fundamentalists. This propaganda dehumanized other ethnic groups and created a climate of intense fear and paranoia. It convinced many Serbs that their very existence was at stake and that military action was a matter of survival. This Serbian nationalism was the driving force behind the wars in Croatia, Bosnia, and Kosovo. Milosevic's goal was to create a greater Serbia, uniting all Serb-populated territories from the wreckage of Yugoslavia. This ambition led directly to campaigns of ethnic cleansing, a horrifying euphemism for the forced removal, and often mass murder of non-Serb populations from these territories. The Siege of Sarajevo and the massacre at Srebrenica, where over 8,000 Bosniak men and boys were systematically executed, are the most infamous atrocities of this campaign. Milosevic's use of ethnic division was a masterclass in cynical power politics. He didn't necessarily believe all the nationalist fervor he whipped up, but he knew it was the most effective way to mobilize the Serbian population, eliminate his political rivals, and consolidate his control over the military and state apparatus. He tore a country apart, unleashed unimaginable violence, and left a legacy of mass graves and deep-seated hatred that the region is still struggling to overcome. He was eventually overthrown and died in a cell at The Hague while on trial for genocide and crimes against humanity. Let's travel to Southeast Asia, to the Philippines, and examine the presidency of Rodrigo Duterte. Known for his foul-mouthed, aggressive style, Duterte rose to power on a promise to brutally crack down on crime, particularly the drug trade. But woven into his strongman persona and his infamous war on drugs is a pattern of divisive rhetoric that has targeted and marginalized some of the Philippines' most vulnerable populations, including indigenous groups and the country's Muslim minority. Duterte's war on drugs has resulted in thousands of extrajudicial killings, primarily targeting the urban poor, But his rhetoric has also been aimed at other groups he perceives as obstacles. He has been openly hostile towards the Lumad, the indigenous peoples of the southern island of Mindanao. He has accused their community schools of teaching rebellion and has threatened to bomb them. This language not only endangers these communities but also serves a political purpose. Mindanao is rich in natural resources, and the Lumad's ancestral land claims are often seen as a barrier to mining and agricultural interests, which are key political allies. Similarly, Duterte has had a complex and often inflammatory relationship with the Philippines' Muslim population, known as Moros, who are also concentrated in Mindanao. While his administration did oversee the creation of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, a significant step towards peace, his rhetoric has often been hostile and generalizing. During the 2017 siege of Marawi City by ISIS-affiliated militants, he made shocking jokes about raping women and declared he would eat the livers of terrorists. This kind of violent, dehumanizing language can easily bleed over and stigmatize the broader Muslim population. This approach is about creating clear enemies for his populist narrative. The enemy can be the drug addict, the criminal, the rebellious indigenous person, or the terrorist. By defining these threats in stark, uncompromising terms, Duterte positions himself as the punisher, the only one willing to do what's necessary to protect the law-abiding majority. This resonates with many Filipinos who are fed up with crime and corruption, and are willing to overlook human rights abuses in the name of order. His divisive rhetoric also serves to distract from other issues and consolidate his power. By focusing the national conversation on his bloody wars against designated enemies, he deflects scrutiny from economic problems or accusations of corruption within his government. He creates a permanent crisis atmosphere where his authoritarian methods are seen as necessary. It's a strategy that rallies his base and silences dissent by labeling critics as sympathizers of the very enemies he claims to be fighting. For our final example, we go to France, a country that prides itself on the revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. But for decades, a powerful undercurrent of anti-immigrant sentiment has been championed by one family, the Le Pens. We'll focus on the patriarch, Jean-Marie Le Pen, the founder of the National Front Party. He was the architect of a political strategy that brought far-right, racially charged politics from the fringes into the mainstream of French life. Le Pen built his entire political career on a platform of France for the French. His primary targets were immigrants from France's former colonies in North and West Africa, who are predominantly Muslim. He masterfully exploited the economic anxieties and cultural insecurities of a segment of the white French working class, telling them that their jobs were being stolen and their culture was being erased by these newcomers. He famously used the slogan, "2 million unemployed is 2 million immigrants too many." His rhetoric was often crude and deliberately provocative. He was convicted multiple times for inciting racial hatred and for Holocaust denial, having once referred to the Nazi gas chambers as a detail of history. These weren't just slips of the tongue, they were calculated outrages designed to grab headlines and signal to his core supporters that he was a man who dared to say what they were privately thinking. He thrived on the controversy, positioning himself as a martyr for free speech against a politically correct establishment. Le Pen's strategy involved creating a moral panic around Islam. He and his party consistently linked immigration with crime, terrorism, and the supposed Islamization of France. They painted a picture of French suburbs being turned into no-go zones ruled by Sharia law, a narrative that, while largely false, was incredibly effective at stoking fear. This allowed him to frame every social problem, from unemployment to crime rates, through the lens of immigration and race, offering a simple solution: close the borders and send the immigrants home. Though he never won the presidency, his impact was immense. In 2002, he shocked the world by making it to the second round of the presidential election, proving the potency of his message. He dragged the political center to the right, forcing mainstream politicians to adopt tougher stances on immigration and security to avoid losing votes to him. His daughter, Marine Le Pen, has since tried to detoxify the party's image, but the core message remains. Jean-Marie Le Pen laid the groundwork, demonstrating how a charismatic leader could build a powerful political movement by exploiting racial and religious divisions in the heart of Western Europe. So, there you have it. 10 leaders, 10 different countries, but one very similar, very dangerous playbook. From Hitler's systematic demonization to Trump's modern-day rallies, From Mugabe's land seizures to Orban's border fences, the pattern is clear. These leaders show how dangerous it can be when race is used as a political weapon. It's a strategy that offers simple answers to complex problems by creating another to blame. It preys on our deepest fears and resentments, promising to restore a lost sense of pride or security by targeting a scapegoat. And in the process, it poisons public discourse, erodes democratic norms, and can lead to violence and oppression. The scary part is how effective this tactic can be. It provides a powerful sense of belonging for the in-group and a clear enemy to rally against. It distracts from real issues like economic inequality, corruption, or government incompetence. When people are scared and angry, a leader who points to a specific group and says they are the problem can be incredibly compelling. This isn't just a history lesson, this playbook is still being used right now, all over the world. The language might change, the targets might shift, but the underlying mechanism of division for the sake of power remains the same. But understanding the playbook is the first step to countering it. It's up to us to recognize these tactics and work towards a more inclusive future. That means calling out dog whistles and divisive rhetoric when we hear it. It means demanding that our leaders focus on solving actual problems instead of manufacturing enemies. It means engaging with people who are different from us, listening to their stories, and building bridges of empathy, not walls of fear. The choice between division and unity, between fear and hope, is a constant one. And it's a choice that we all have a part in making every single day. Thanks for watching.